Welcome to the What About Us podcast, where I, Bronagh Loughlin, will be introducing you to some of the people behind the What About Us musical and movement. The What About Us project aims to give a voice to a generation who are demanding change, using the international language of music and the hashtag #WhatAboutUsMusic social media platforms. The protest musical, which premieres in Dublin next year, addresses issues such as conflict, greed, human trafficking, and mental health, all wrapped up in a beautiful love story. It is being created using a collaborative process with musicians and artists from all over the globe. The storyline is being workshopped in Dublin, Jerusalem, and Palestine. The movement reaches a wider audience and addresses a broader range of societal issues, including climate change, the environment, war, and human rights, which affect the youth of today and tomorrow. It's an ambitious project, but one with a rapidly growing following. In today's episode, I speak with Siofra O'Donovan, who's one of the co-founders of What About Us. Siofra has been writing the What About Us story for some time now, and she tells us a bit about the plot and her own writing experience, which helped her in crafting this amazing story. Hiya.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Good, yeah.
Can you give us a bit of an introduction to yourself then, Siofra?
Yes, sure. I've been writing for a really long time. Well, like since I was 9, but professionally, I suppose since the year 1999 or so. And I published my first novel, Malinsky, a historical novel set between Poland and Ireland, and that was beginning of the year 2000. So that was then translated into Polish, and then I worked on many other projects and published other books like Pema and the Yak, which was a story of Tibetan exiles, a travelogue, and the Arts Council funded that research I did over many years. But I was actually originally sent to India to study Tibetan Buddhist philosophy and Tibetan language, and then I did an MA in London as well. So I've had kind of quite a varied career. And so I've just been writing novels in the last few years, and this is, and I teach as well. What About Us didn't overlap, but it was while I was working on a book that came out last year, Til Hell Freezes, a biography of Kevin Barry, that I was asked by Aaron Wilkinson, one of the musical directors, who I've known for many, many years. He said, would you come on board and help to write the story for the What About Us musical? So then I thought it was very exciting by the sound of it. And then I had a meeting with Sammy over Skype. He was in Portugal, and that was I guess May 2020, but I was literally on the deadline for the last draft of the Kevin Barry book, which was coming out the following September. So it was really wonderful to have things happen back to back like that. And it was a project that really interested me because of its themes, because of the motivation behind it, because of the ideology behind it, and because I would have worked with similar themes, but in very different contexts as well, with war, refugees, dislocation, dispossession. But in terms of the love story, that really interested me as well. I've written a 12th century novel, a novel set in 12th century France, which is a love story between Eleanor of Aquitaine's daughter and a poet in the court. But it's also, so that's, I have been working on that book for a number of years as well. And that's, hopefully we get a publisher soon.
You kind of mentioned it a bit there, but how did you, I suppose, get into writing?
I've always loved stories, so my father was a journalist and a writer, and he was my mentor. And I guess quite a few people in the family wrote books. There were artists as well and architects, but it was my father who was my mentor. And he was a very active journalist. And then he got a job that he detested in the Bank of Ireland. He was a public relations manager. He did his best. In fact, he was very active in the arts, trying to support the arts through public relations with the Bank of Ireland. But he just didn't like that culture of people working in banks, didn't suit him at all. So he got out and he went and wrote freelance again, and then he started writing books. So when he said to me I guess it was 1987, he said to me, I was doing my intersearch or something, he said, what'll I do next? What'll I write next? He'd written a book about called Dreamers of Dreams. It was about successful Irish American businessman in America, and he went over for the trip of a lifetime. And I mean, he'd been there many times because my grandma was from Dallas, Texas, but Dad had finished that book and it was, quite successful and everything. And he had a business column in the Irish Times called Mercator. But he said to me, what am I going to do next? And I said, you're going to write a book about Kevin Barry, because all I'd heard through my whole childhood was the story of Kevin Barry. He's my great uncle and he was Dad's uncle. So yeah, that was the next thing. And then I just had this bond with my father through writing. And I guess I went on to study English in UCD. I haven't heard it's as good these days, but you had Declan Carver, you had Seamus Dean, who died recently. These were also my mentors. And I know I'm talking about a lot of male mentors here, but I had a wonderful tutor as well. She was a wonderful woman from the Caribbean. She was really into Beckett and all of that. I know that I was writing a lot of poetry while I was in my undergraduate degree, but something happened when I had finished my exams. I was living in a flat in Monkstown with a Polish friend and a few other people, and just this idea fell out of the sky at the bus stop. That's all I can say. And that's how ideas come to me. They fall out of the sky, or I dreamed them. And then I go, I have to do that. So unless I'm called to do something like, the What About Us thing, but when it's my own creative process, it's like, oh, okay, I don't have a choice here. I just go with it. So that frustrated many agents as well that I had, because they go, what are you doing? Because I do one thing, they go, what are you doing? Why don't you write more literary fiction? Because I'd published Malinsky and then I was doing something else completely different after that. So I guess I'm quite versatile as a writer. I find it really a wonderful process. Everything that I've written most things have come to me in a dream, an actual dream.
Wow.
So that's what I knew, or some kind of vision. And that's the beginning and that's it. And I have to go with that.
Wow, that's so interesting that it just kind of comes to you, and just that you dream these ideas and everything as well. Do you think like your writing would be a bit of an escape for you then?
Writing has always been exactly that. That's really perceptive. Yeah, really much. To be very honest, I didn't have a hugely easy childhood. So writing just became, when I was like 9 or 10, I was writing this novel about a girl, sort of almost trapped in a house. And, she was, we all imagine when we're that age that we're princesses or something, but it was an escape for sure. It was absolutely, that's exactly what it was. And it still is, because all art gives us a remedy for reality. It can either if it mirrors it too closely, we won't get anything from it, perhaps, in terms of understanding our life experience better. But when it holds a mirror up, but it does so using metaphor, we can get an understanding of what's going on. Because I think it was Nietzsche who said, life is lived forwards, but understood backwards. So we might be in the midst of some dreadfully difficult situation, but we don't know, and we don't understand the meaning of it. And what's his name? Viktor Frankl, just reread that recently, his memoir of being in the camps and how he dealt with it psychologically and emotionally. If we cannot understand why we're suffering, we're hopeless. So we need to there has to be a meaning, there has to be a reason. That's what a human being, I think, is always trying to do. I think that's what art does, what writing does, what music does. I think music is the most transcendent, though, of all the arts, because it just goes somewhere very quickly it just transports you very, very quickly.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I think with music, it's kind of universally loved in that kind of way. This kind of art form that everyone gravitates towards. We just have different genres that we like. So
yeah, exactly. And there's some absolutely beautiful music that, coming out of this musical, and I've been listening to that, since, last year, and the musicians over in Israel, Palestinian, the Israeli musicians are really, it's really top class, and there's some pieces that I just love, and they're often in my head as I'm writing the novel now.
It probably really helps you write the book though as well.
Yes. Well, I've always absolutely loved Middle Eastern music. I've spent an awful lot of time in the East. I don't particularly like the West, and I'm not that fond of living in Ireland either, but I adore Middle Eastern music. I adore Middle Eastern pop. I love Tunisian pop music. I love so much. I love Jewish klezmer music. I love belly dance music. I love all of that. It just really gets me going. I find that some of the music I've heard really has been really inspiring.
Yeah, no, definitely. In terms of writing books then and everything, like you mentioned, obviously the ideas kind of fall out of the sky, or they're in the dreams, or that kind of thing. So we kind of know how it starts off, but what would be the sort of if you could, process of writing a book? Because for me, I mentioned to you before, I write like blogs, articles, stuff like that. I can't even imagine tackling a book, to be honest.
Yeah, and well, I teach creative writing through The Hero's Journey by Joseph Campbell, which is an archetypal narrative pattern that's found in all myths and stories across the world. I've taught it in prisons and schools and all sorts of places. That's really useful to track your story. Very useful. But in my own creative process, I tend to, it's like if I was baking a cake, the whole kitchen would be a complete mess, and then something nice would hopefully come out of it. But I do tend to make a complete mess. I storm something. Like there was one time where in my life when I was writing a novel, and it was to follow the Malinsky novel, and I was getting extremely confused, but I realized that there were 3 different stories within one, and then I had to pare them down and write the next book, which was the Travelogue of Tibetans in Exile. The experience of living and studying and researching in India had such a powerful impact on me that there was no way a piece of literary fiction based in Ireland was going to work for me. I wasn't even interested in doing that, to be honest. So the creative process can be very messy in its early stages, for me anyway. And so when I came to write this story, I mean, originally I've been handed a kind of series of kind of very, very loosely sketched scenes, which span thousands and thousands of years. And so I started to work with that template. But we realized, I mean, I started to write and I had scenes, say, set in Sultan Saladin's court in Cairo. I had scenes in the Crusades in the 12th century, but it was all, within the story. However, we realized, this isn't going to work for the musical. This is way too much. And if you think about it in terms of costume and all of that, and the expense of doing something like that, and it wasn't necessary to do that time travel. We realized as a creative team, and then the story was condensed into, a smaller time frame. However, it was very important to keep Lemuria, because Lemuria, where the story starts, is the place that we all aspire perhaps to be, to have, to hold, a place that is beyond suffering, a place that where people live in harmony, where wisdom is a value, people, there are elders who are respected within the community, the ideal kind of beautiful natural place as well, a place of exquisite beauty, and where people are living in harmony with that nature and in a kind of biorhythm with that nature. So it was very important that it started there, because the 2 main characters, they come from there and then they travel. This is the only really now fantastical part where they then transition separately, unfortunately, into the earth experience, the world experience, where they encounter oppression and slavery and war, traffickings, and all of the themes that we know are in What About Us. So if you've come consciously from a place where there is some kind of perfection, you will always be contrasting it with that. The other interesting thing about Mahan and Alina is that Alina, for example, when she's found in the desert, where are your papers? I have no papers. I don't know actually how to tell you where I've come from. So I think that's interesting, because that helps to diffuse the intensity of the conflict, the Israel-Palestine issue, and then the Northern Ireland issue as well. And Mahan has a similar thing in there. In fact, somebody says in the novel now that I'm writing, somebody says, where are you from? He says, well, from Lemuria. He says, Nuri. So, those kind of things. A lot of humor has come into the novel. It's a bit like a Ginger Man novel. It's really been very interesting to write, go far more in depth.
You kind of mentioned it a bit, but beyond writing, like what other kind of work would you do?
I'm on a panel, the Arts Council, called the Writers in Prisons panel, and I'm called in to work in prisons. And I did a project quite recently, but unfortunately not in the prison because of all the silly rules, but because of the Kevin Barry book. Kevin Barry is something they're very interested in. I've worked with political prisons in Portlaoise already. I've worked many years. Go in on a yearly basis for, say, a month or 2 of workshops, or sometimes just a few weeks. But it was an amazing process. So they were really with me on the way when I was researching and writing the Kevin Barry book, and they were really interested in engaging with that. And well, everything got locked up. I mean, they were not, everybody was locked up. Everybody was in prison, so nobody could do anything. And then began to know how they felt. But they questioned somebody who organises all the arts things in the prisons. He asked me to do a particular thing where Sebastian Barry had done this. he was interviewed about a book, and the interview was then broadcast all the prisoners, and then they were to interact with that somehow. Obviously, it's much better if you can actually go in. But so my one will be broadcast then in September, and we're hoping that this will generate more interest in the Kevin Barry book, and it should be going into paperback this year, I hope, as well. But see, the story of Kevin Barry is obviously very relevant and important. They're political prisoners. People go to me, what do you mean they're political prisoners? Like, people don't seem to realise there's political prisons in Ireland. But of course there are. And the story of Kevin Barry, the large part of the story in the book, obviously he had a very short life, but several chapters are taken up with his time in prison and his court-martial and his execution in the end. So this is a cathartic book for prisoners to read. Plus, many of them have been very inspired by Kevin Barry. That's one thing that I do. Schools, I go into schools. Don't actually enjoy that as much. I really love prison work. And then I teach independent courses online, and I used to do them more in person, but I'll be doing them more in person in September. But I teach 2 different courses. One called the Heroines Journey, which is based on Joseph Campbell's archetypal journey, and the hero with 1,000 faces. And as you may know, that archetypal narrative pattern is used in a 12-step process in script writing. So I've used that for script writing. I've written a couple of scripts, a couple of film scripts as well. I teach that course, but I teach it in a way that it's not about just creative writing. It's about accessing your creativity through this, because the archetypes are very powerful week to week. The first week you have the hero or the heroine. You have the call to adventure. You have the crossing the threshold. You have in the belly of the whale. You're going across and going into Act 2, and then the exposition of all of the drama and the working with the allies, and then dealing with the enemies, and then getting the boon or the treasure and all of that. So that's like our life anyway. So people can use it as a tool for self-reflection. And actually in Nebraska prison, they were using the hero's journey as a tool for the prisoners for self-reflection. And I think that's what I really want to do now, is to go into the prisons and teach this like a long course, like an 8 to 12 week course. And it could really be beneficial for them. I've been doing Zoom classes, and the great thing about Zoom classes is that you get people from all over the world: Australia, America, Europe, UK. So that was really exciting, actually. I taught the Heroines Journey last September, a full course of that. The Heroines Journey is a kind of a feminine reaction or response to the hero's journey. So it's more or less for women and the feminine journey, but some men have done it too and found it very beneficial, because according to Carl Jung, and many psychologists and psychoanalysts, within us there is the male and female principle, and within any wisdom tradition they know this. And we have both within us, and we're not just one. And so exploring the feminine is a very important self-reflective tool, especially in the world we live in, where the male principle has gone completely bananas. It's all about control. It's all about ambition, success, greed, all of it. It's gone into the negative state of the masculinity. The positive state is where they stand. The masculine principle stands and holds the feminine and honors that. But that's not happening. Our earth has been desecrated. And this is another thing that comes into what about us, the environment, the desecration of the earth and her resources. So and the character Alina very much embodies that. I don't know, I've been doing a lot of different conferences and stuff because of the different things I've been writing, and lots of things. But life hasn't been, exactly normal. I don't really like Zoom, so I don't find it. I just did a conference in Poland, in Łódź. I was so looking forward to going there, but no, it has to be on boring old Zoom.
That's really interesting about your work, though. It seems like you cover a lot of ground, and there's a lot of crossovers with What About Us and everything as well. Can you tell a bit about the story? Just because there would be some people who are listening to this who might have only heard about What About Us recently.
Yeah. So it's really a story of peace and love triumphing over war. It starts in the land called Lemuria, a place that has no conflict. Lena and Mahan are 2 of the main characters. Lena is a spirited and brilliant healer in Lemuria, who, unbeknownst to her, is pregnant by her beloved Mahan, a wise warrior who's fought wars in the world. And he's seen the conflicts caused by the beliefs that human beings cling to. So Alina has a great desire to go to the world, to see the world. She dreams of the adventures that she could have there. So in a way, she's embodying the masculine principle more there, whereas he wants to stay and keep everything in the, the status quo, keep safe, because he's seen the horrors of the world. But she's determined to go, and she's also very much prompted to go by Morgana, who appears like a mentor at the beginning, and she's a very interesting character because she's quite quixotic. She's mercurial. She changes and changes and changes. You don't know what she is. Is she a villain? Is she a mentor? Is she a guide? What is she? So she can be all things, but in the end, there's a resolution.
Yeah, so no, that's really interesting. Have you ever actually written for a musical before, or is this a first? How has that kind of changed the process?
Well, it's a hugely collaborative process. So it's meant, being on a team, or it's meant, workshopping with musicians in Israel as well. And that's been wonderful, and being in contact with people, always by Zoom, unfortunately, but all over really the world. And, sometimes she's based in Spain, sometimes she's in Jerusalem, sometimes Sammy is in Dublin, sometimes he's in Portugal, but we're always really on Zoom, except a couple of the people involved, the other directors, Aaron and Des, they're living close by me. Well, certainly for the last 6 months, Aaron has been, so we would meet, and it does make a huge difference to actually meet and brainstorm. And we had great workshops last summer out in Sammy's in Portugal, where Aaron, Des, Sammy and me, we all workshopped the story, and we made huge progress, in a week. It was great.
And how did you come up with such a unique story? Like, was this another fell from the sky, or did they kind of give the idea for the story, or was it a dream?
Well, Lemuria did come to me sort of intuitively. I thought that would be the right place for the story to begin. So that was kind of an intuitive thing. And then well, the idea of Mac really got born in those Portugal workshops, and that there had to be this younger, because we wanted to appeal to the younger people. So the idea of Mac was literally born that time in Portugal, and that was all of us brainstorming together. And Elena and Mahan, they came to me just, from the Lemuria context, and I realized they need to make this journey into the world. And originally, as I said before, I thought this would be a time traveling kind of thing, but that really was too epic, too fantastical. So we reduced all of that. But I always felt that it was very important to keep some of the magic, and some of the fantasy, because the themes could be very heavy and difficult to deal with. And nobody really wants to be sitting there and listening to, a heavy story of conflict. And I'm sure that's not what's happening anyway. But, two things can offset that: some magic and some humor. So I'm trying to get that balance myself right now in the novel, because if you go too fantastical, then people may not be so interested. But, the fact that these people are from Lemuria, they might have certain gifts that they carry through their earth and worldly experience, which can help them, in that Harry Potter kind of way. I have an invisible cloak. Well, they don't have invisible cloaks, and they don't have, holy grails. They don't have all that stuff, but they have perhaps some gift of. Mahan tries to make himself invisible at a certain point in the Belvoir forest in Belfast, when he sees a group of IRA men running through the forest with a whole pile of guns under sacks. And then when he's spotted, he tries to make himself invisible because he thought he would be able to do that, but it doesn't always work. So there's a bit of that where they're trying to work out themselves how much of their Lemurian gifts can they use in the world. And it isn't always that easy, because Earth is very dense. Earth is very a difficult experience, you know what I mean? It has so much suffering, it has so much conflict, that the magic may not always work. But I think we need to use a bit of that to offset the enormous, themes that there are in this story.
Yeah, no, definitely. I was just going to ask you actually about challenges you've experienced when writing it, but it sounds like that is a challenge in itself, nearly, like trying to make it entertaining and not too heavy in a sense, because these are like heavy issues to be discussing, but they need to be discussed all the same. But you still want to make sure it's entertaining for an audience and everything.
Yeah, I have to say I got very disheartened when there was actual real conflict in Israel again, and hearing what was happening to the Palestinians. And I was really, everybody was very distressed, and we were the show, she just disappeared off a Zoom because she said there were rockets outside. So it made it incredibly real. I think it is, more important than ever that a story like this is told through wonderful music, which helps to transcend the huge difficulties that there are. And that could be possibly a sort of, there were, imagine there were songs that embodied that, and then those became the inspiration. So it's not the story that's going to be the thing that carries on. It's going to be the music. It's going to be the songs.
In terms of any other challenges, did you experience any kind of like writer's block or anything like that?
I don't really get writer's block. I just tend to make a huge, like, scrambling mess first, and then I pull out the pieces and I go, this is going to work, and this is this thread and this thread, and then you're weaving, I suppose there's definitely lulls though, when you're in the creative process, like Mac is about to be born in the story, the novel version now, and somehow that's quite a lot had to be built. I had to do a lot of world building around what kind of place was this that Mac was born in, and what does it look like? And for me as a novelist, I can really go very deeply into it in that form, whereas when I was writing before, it was more like just sort of more like a summary, and now I can really see it and smell it and feel it more. So hopefully people will enjoy that. But do I have writer's block? No, I mean, I do a lot of work with people in workshops myself to help people overcome writer's block. And the way I teach writing, it's very hands-on. You write in the workshops and then you read out and you share. So I've never seen anybody I've very rarely seen anybody not able to write. I just do it, because I think, especially since I had my son, I never had a block, because I felt there's very little time on planet Earth.
Yeah,
there's a lot to do. So I and also when you've got a kid, like, you're going, oh, I've even less time, right? We're going to use this time really well.
It's good you don't get writer's block anyway. You can always get the words out. And I like what you said as well about you don't get writer's block, you just make more of a mess and then take the bits out.
Yeah.
In terms of the story though, like, I know it's probably hard to estimate exactly, but how long do you think it took you to write it?
I'm definitely still in it. It's not finished by any means. I think the story, as we've summarized it, works. I don't know what they've done to it now, but I think it works as a story now, as I've seen the last time in sort of April or so.
Yeah.
And so I'm basing the novel on that. And I'm far from finished. I mean, maybe I'll have a first draft of the whole story done by November, let's say. It takes 6 to 9 months to write a novel, a first draft of a novel.
Yeah.
It can take longer, and it can also take less time, and it may take me less time, but right now I think that's where I'm at.
No, that sounds like a good place to be at, honestly. It sounds like you're on target and everything, and you really connect with the story and everything, which is really important, and you don't get writer's block, so you don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, the only thing that would inhibit me creatively would be like when I'm really under pressure on a deadline, and because of different circumstances, we were under pressure to get a summary out, for different things.
Yeah.
And I did find that creatively difficult. I wouldn't be at my best under that kind of pressure.
I
get you. I'm really happy now just to be doing this, because I take more time and I can explore more, and as I'm going I can do more research, and I'm reading a lot of books all around the whole subject.
How do you envision the musical success?
I think once there are key songs written, and then they're choreographed around that, and the story obviously must be completely solid, and that people just draw from that because it's a strong foundation. And I think everybody's always seen it as a very big production, something that involves a lot of young people, something that crosses borders, with Israeli, Palestinian, Irish musicians, and that beautiful melange of the East and the West. For me, that's a really important part of it, and that hasn't been done before. So it's a very unique story. It's a very unique musical as well. So I think there's so much going for it. But I'm not a professional in terms of production or artistic direction or anything like that. So there's many pieces that need to come together and are coming together. But as I said, I'm kind of just on the backseat at the moment, just writing the novel. But I love seeing the clips of the stuff that show she's doing at the moment with Israeli and Palestinian musicians, and I find that wonderful, absolutely wonderful.
I mean, that's everything I wanted to ask you, Siofra. But yeah, it was great talking to you. Anyway, really enjoyed hearing you talk about the work you do as well with the prisoners and everything. I think that's so interesting, and it must give you another. It seems like you're learning about many different cultures and many different people as well, which makes you obviously the perfect person to write about this story.
Yeah, no, it really grabbed me when I was asked to do it. So yeah, really, such interesting themes in it.
Thanks so much for tuning into the What About Us podcast. Be sure to follow all of our social media platforms at #WhatAboutUsMusic.